Israel Today is a unique radio show that teaches biblical truth for changing times. We do this through Q&A, timely interviews, dramatic readings from the life of Holocaust survivor Zvi Kalisher, and of course, Bible teaching.
To learn more, visit foiradio.org.
Join us for Friends of Israel Today, Sunday morning at 11:30 Central on American Family Radio.
There are now going to be 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
This is the most important Supreme Court vacancy for this country in at least a generation.
You are going to see 20 states pass laws banning abortion outright.
They stole a Supreme Court seat from the Democrats.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
Roe v. Wade is doomed.
This is time for vengeance.
Democrats should dig in hard here and do everything they conceivably can do to block this nomination.
The whole reason Neil Gorsuch is there and Merrick Garland isn't is because Republicans acted so radically.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to this brand new broadcast of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable, and effervescent.
As always.
As always. Glad to have you in the conversation today. We are stacked and packed and locked and loaded today. A lot of follow-up to Anthony Kennedy's decision to step down from the Supreme Court. We're going to process that. We're going to talk about some of the major court rulings that could be overturned with the new conservative jurist in the nature of an Antonin Scalia or Neil Gorsuch. So we're going to break that down for you as we go. Now, before we get into all that, I want to turn our attention to the Word of God. We're in Isaiah 13 right now, reading the magnificent poetry of Isaiah the prophet as he relays God's Word to the people of his day. Now, as we look at chapter 13 and 14, which is where we are today, what we see here is the sovereignty of God over all of the nations of the world. God is not a tribal deity. He's not a God who has charge of some defined territory. He is the sovereign God of all the earth and every nation. He determines the destiny of every nation on earth, even the ones who do not acknowledge him or acknowledge his existence. Now, as the backstory to chapter 13 and 14, God had used Babylon as the rod of his wrath to judge Judah, to punish Judah for turning its back on him. But Babylon went too far. It exceeded the authority that God had given to it to discipline his people. So now he turns to punishing Babylon for exceeding his authority. So he raises up the enemies of Persia to come against the nation of Babylon. He says in chapter 13, verse 3, this is God speaking, referring to the armies of Persia. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones. In other words, God says, I have consecrated the armies of Persia to my purposes. They may not know anything about it, but they are my consecrated ones. I've set them apart for this purpose, whether they know it or not. And I have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host, literally an army, for battle. And so the judgment of God falls on the city of Babylon. Verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. We begin to see here that Babylon's main sin was the sin of pride. Now, he uses the metaphor of the shaking of the heavens to refer to political upheaval. He says in verse 12, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth shall be shaken out of its place at the wrath of the Lord of hosts. The stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. So Isaiah doesn't mean literally that these things will happen in the heavens, but if those things were to happen in the heavens, they would be a symbol of what is taking place on earth, the shattering of the mighty powers of the kingdoms of the earth. And he describes how severe the judgment on Babylon will be. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes, their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Now this is because this is what they had done to Israel. In God's sovereign justice, the same treatment they had meted out to others, dashing their babies' brains against the rocks, is now going to be done to them. They will have to suffer the same violence that they meted out to others. And he says the destruction will be total. Verse 19, Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. They're still looking for Sodom and Gomorrah. That's how complete the overthrow of those cities was. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there, but wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. Their ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, jackals in the pleasant palaces. You know, remember Saddam Hussein. He tried to rebuild Babylon. He tried to rebuild the very city that Isaiah is talking about here. He knew exactly where it had been. He made a concerted effort to reclaim it from the desert and to rebuild it. And he failed miserably. It is still, as Isaiah prophesied, the haunt of jackals and wolves and wild goats and howling creatures. Now the Lord can build up what he destroyed. He used Babylon to destroy Judah, but he also has the same capacity to rebuild. So if God has destroyed something in your life, maybe he's destroyed what amounts to your whole life and cut it down to nothing as he did to Judah. God has the capacity and the ability and the power to rebuild your life just as he did for Judah. Here's what he says. The Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel and will set them in their own land. They were returned to the land by Cyrus the Great to Judea, to their homeland. He even gave them resources to rebuild David's temple and resume the worship of the true and the living God. Now he identifies the fundamental problem with the king of Babylon, and it was human pride. Listen to what he says in chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High, but instead you will be brought down to Sheol. So the fundamental problem with Babylon, as with us, is human pride. Human pride is a far greater sin than sexual sins or sins of indulgence. And some people see in this language a description of the fall of Satan, and of course it is, because Satan fell for the same reason that the king of Babylon fell. Who was behind this pride in the heart of the king of Babylon? It was Satan himself. So human pride is still the worst of human sins. We must never think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think. We should always think about ourselves with sober judgment. Doesn't mean we must downplay our gifts and abilities. It just means that we remind ourselves that whatever talent we have is a gift from God, and it ought to prompt gratitude rather than pride. Well, let's close our time together in prayer. Lord, I pray for my nation that we will recognize your sovereignty over all nations, including our own. May we humble ourselves under your mighty hand so that you will not have to use force to put an end to our arrogance or humble us in our pride. I pray that we will humbly as a nation acknowledge our dependence upon you and ask for your protection.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki.
From Airing the Addisons on Urban Family Talk.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference coming up August 17th and 18th.
The list of speakers is amazing. We'll have Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, Stacy Washington, Lonnie Poindexter, Pastor Dexter Sanders, and we'll be there too.
There's a direct attack by the enemy on marriage and family, and babies in the womb are treated like political footballs instead of life. We want to encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family. If we can get our families on track, a lot of society's problems could be solved. The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is from Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The Henrico County, Virginia Public School Administrators held a ceremony called Career and Technical Letter of Intent Signing Day. It was a celebration of students who've earned industry-based certifications during high school, who are now entering the workforce upon graduation. It drew the attention of Dirty Jobs host Mike Rowe, who celebrated the event on social media, saying, "This is the way forward. No attempt to close the skills gap will ever succeed until or unless we celebrate those who are willing to learn an in-demand skill."
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, and the program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio, and you are listening to the American Family Radio Network. Well, let's jump into some stuff today. I've got a story sitting right on top here. We talked about it a little bit. The Supreme Court ruling that unions can no longer collect compulsory dues. Now, only about 6.5% of workers that are in the private sector are unionized. I mean, that's where we think all the union workers are. Only 1 out of every 16 workers in the private sector is in a union. But a third of all public employees, those are the ones that are paid by your taxes and mine, are unionized. And they impose compulsory union dues on the people in the union, even those who do not want to belong, and even on those who vehemently disagree with the values and priorities of the union and how those dues are spent. Now, here's the problem. These dues are collected by these public sector unions, like the teachers' unions, and then out of the dues that are collected, union bosses, union leaders decide to give chunks of money to political causes and to political candidates. For instance, in the year 2016 alone, teachers' unions took $33 million out of members' paychecks. I mean, remember, this includes teachers that do not want to be in a teachers' union. They recognize the harm that teachers' unions pose to public education. You cannot get a bad teacher fired anymore in the public school system. Why? Because of teachers' unions. You can't get innovative and creative educational programs into schools. Why? Because of teachers' unions. They cob it up and they block it up. They're almost universally in the hands of people who are on the far left side of the political spectrum. So think about that, $33.2 million going into political campaigns, almost every last bit of it to Democrats. So you can understand why they howled over this ruling, because this is going to be a gut shot to public sector unions. I explained yesterday, I won't review it in any detail, why we just simply should not have unions in the public sector. Because when they sit down to negotiate with lawmakers, remember that's who they work for, they work in a public thing, the lawmakers are not negotiating with their own money, they're negotiating with our money. They don't care how much of our money they have to give away to get a deal. So it's fundamentally unfair, never should happen, they just ought to be outlawed. Now this, in effect, is going to outlaw them, because I think most teachers are just simply not going to want to belong. If they don't have to pay unions, why would they want to belong to a union? Now, if they believe in the union, then fine, let them pay dues, that's fine. Nobody has a problem with that. But if they don't believe in the union, they don't support it, now they will have an opportunity not to have their funds used to promote far-left political causes, and everybody is going to be better off for the trouble. Now, let's talk again about what's going on with the retirement of Anthony Kennedy. He's going to officially go into retirement in late July. And we need to begin looking ahead, and that's what we're going to take a minute to do, to who the next Supreme Court justice is going to be. And I've got somebody to recommend to you that we keep a close eye on. But like I mentioned, this is a meltdown for the left, because Anthony Kennedy, remember, Anthony Kennedy is widely considered, I mean, you read most talking snake media outlets, and they will classify him as a conservative. And he's been a conservative in this last term. As I told you, that's why I thought he was for sure going to resign. He's making all of these casting all of these conservative votes, one after another, completely unlike him. He even ruled against a gay couple in the Colorado Baker case. He's the guy that legalized same-sex marriage and imposed it on the entire country in 2015. And here he is ruling against a homosexual couple. What's up with that? Well, I think Anthony Kennedy was seeking to shore up his legacy, trying to create the impression that he was a conservative jurist, a Constitution-upholding jurist on his way out the door. He was anything but. He was responsible for the worst Supreme Court opinions in the last 32 years. I can say that without hesitation, without batting an eye, without blinking an eye. I'm working on a column on this, which I'll probably have available tomorrow, but I'm going to kind of walk through it. And just to give you a quick overview, he was the one that wrote the opinion in the Romer v. Evans case in 1996. That was an amendment to the Colorado State Constitution that prohibited the granting of special rights on the basis of sexually deviant behavior. And it prohibited the indoctrination of school children into homosexual ideology. I mean, you know, the reason we have 4-year-olds being indoctrinated into transgenderism is because of Anthony Kennedy, because of his ruling in 1996. This is where it wound up, 4-year-olds being indoctrinated into transgenderism. He was the author of that opinion. He was the author of the 1992 opinion in Planned Parenthood v. Casey. This is the one they could have overturned Roe v. Wade. They could have done it in 1992. Anthony Kennedy was the reason that they did not. You know, the sad, sorry thing is in 1992, when the Casey case was settled by the Supreme Court, there are 9 members of the Supreme Court, remember, and 8 of them in 1992 had been put on the bench by George H.W. Bush or by Ronald Reagan. 8 of the 9. And they would not overturn Roe v. Wade. And Anthony Kennedy wrote the major opinion that upheld the Roe v. Wade decision in Casey v. Planned Parenthood. Now realize that since then, since 1992, what's that been, 26 years, we've had probably 30 million babies aborted in the last 26 years. Ripped from the wombs of their mothers. Everybody's up in arms about ripping children from the arms of their mothers on the southern border. Well, what about ripping babies from the wombs of their mothers, which ought to be the safest place in the universe for an unborn baby, dismembering them, and then flushing them away as so much medical waste. That's on Anthony Kennedy. He was the author of that opinion. So the blood of those 30 million children is on a lot of people's hands, but Anthony Kennedy has a pretty good share of that. And remember, the total number of victims of Adolf Hitler's tyranny probably amounted to about 25 million in World War II, when you count the Jews that he gassed and all the people whose lives were lost in the war. So Anthony Kennedy probably responsible, indirectly at least, for more deaths than Adolf Hitler. And yet people are lionizing him on his way out the door. Then he was the one that wrote the opinion in Lawrence v. Texas. This is the ruling that said you cannot make sodomy, which up to that point was always referred to in the law as the crime against nature. Sodomy is the crime against nature. That's how it's been defined in Western Jewish jurisprudence from day one. And Anthony Kennedy said, no, we're now going to consider that the full equivalent morally and socially as heterosexual and heterosexuality. So overturned the freedom of states to criminalize homosexual behavior. And there are a number of people, Family Research Council has said that Lawrence v. Texas was wrongly decided. Lawrence v. Texas said you can't make sodomy a criminal offense. Well, if it's wrongly decided, what does that mean? What's the organization saying that? They're saying that sodomy can legitimately be made a criminal act again. That's what I believe. I believe that's what the scriptures teach. Go to 1 Timothy 1. You'll see it laid out there that it's a suitable subject for the law, Paul says in 1 Timothy 1. But Anthony Kennedy said, no, I know better than God. I know better than 1 Timothy 1. I know better than the scriptures. I know better than the apostles. No, we're going to make that the moral equivalent of heterosexuality. And then he was the one that wrote the Obergefell decision in 2015 that imposed sodomy-based marriage on the entire United States, even though 31 states had already amended their state constitutions to reserve the definition of marriage for the union of one man and one woman. Anthony Kennedy came along, wrote the opinion that swept that aside and said, no, we're going to consider marriages, quote, end quote, that are based on the act of sodomy, the crime against nature. We're going to consider those the moral, legal, and spiritual equivalent of marriages that are formed as a union of one man and one woman. So you look at the damage that Anthony Kennedy has done. This is not a guy that I'm going to lionize. In fact, the title of my column tomorrow is going to be The Justice Who Will Live in Infamy. He did more to promote and justify the killing, the slaughtering, the dismembering of unborn babies than any other man in American history, and he has done more to promote sexual deviancy than any other man in history. This is not a man that ought to be lionized, a man that ought to be praised. So anyway, we're going to look at that stuff in more detail tomorrow. Now let's get some comments from Democrats and what they think about the choice to replace Neil Gorsuch. Here's Chuck Schumer. Got just enough time to get this in on the Senate floor yesterday. Let's listen.
This is the most important Supreme Court vacancy for this country in at least a generation. Nothing less than the fate of our health care system, reproductive rights for women, and countless other protections for middle-class Americans are at stake. Will Republicans and President Trump nominate and vote for someone who will preserve protections for people with pre-existing conditions? Or will they support a justice who will put health insurance companies over patients or put the federal government between a woman and her doctor? The Senate should reject, on a bipartisan basis, any justice who would overturn Roe v. Wade or undermine key health care protections. The Senate should reject anyone who will instinctively side with powerful special interests over the interests of average Americans. Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016, not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year.
Now I'm going to come back to what Chuck Schumer just said about the so-called McConnell rule. It's just a will of the wisp. There's nothing to it. But notice that Chuck Schumer says we have got to resist any judge that would have the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade or Obamacare. So that's their standard. If you've got a judge that's pro-life that might overturn Roe v. Wade, we have to stop him in his tracks. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Yesterday I shared with you the intriguing insights into the decline and decay of Western civilization made by Phil Fernandez, a former SCS student, at the International Society of Christian Apologetics meeting in Georgia. Fernandez explained that Nietzsche in the 19th century brought the death of God to Western civilization. Then the 20th century brought the resulting and consequent death of truth and morality to Western civilization. He correctly pointed out that C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer both predicted that the death of man would follow belief in the death of God and the consequent death of truth. Unless man turns back to God, the one source of absolute truth, he is doomed to experience the grievous, fatal consequences of moral relativism. Fernandez explains that Schaeffer was saying that the Christian worldview was no longer the dominant presupposition of Western culture. Now, a secular humanistic view of reality permeates the thought of the West. Due to this change in view, modern man has fallen below what Schaeffer called the line of despair. Schaeffer meant that by throwing the God of the Bible out of the equation, modern man, left to himself and without divine revelation, could not find absolute truth and eventually gave up his search for it. According to Schaeffer, modern man no longer thinks in terms of antithesis, i.e., the law of non-contradiction. He now views truth as relative, and since he believes there are no absolutes, modern man has rejected universal moral laws and has embraced moral relativism. Schaeffer wrote concerning America, quote, "Our society now functions with no fixed ethics," end quote. And chaos is the inevitable fruit of falling into the temptation of everyone doing that which is right in his own eyes. It leads to either chaos or then chaos and then oppressive order from the government or an elite. More about the consequences of moral relativism and its cure tomorrow. For more information about SES, go to ses.edu. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher
on American Family Radio.
Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
afa.net.
Howdy. Brian Fisher here. Welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Glad to have you in the conversation. You know, going back to the soundbite we just played from Chuck Schumer, where he says, you know, we have to oppose any judge that might overturn Roe and might overturn Obamacare. Now, there's another ruling that I think we have to keep in front of us, which I think becomes an important consideration when you look at a potential Supreme Court justice. Not only can Roe v. Wade be overturned, in fact, everybody says it's likely to be overturned. I hope they're right. I don't know if they're right. You know, a lot of people on the left, they're trying to create fear in the hearts of Democrats. So they're trying to exaggerate the best they can the consequences of having a Trump appointee. And one of the worst fears for them is that Roe v. Wade will be overturned. That was a terribly decided law. You even have Supreme Court justices that defend it, that say it was badly decided. It was poorly decided. Ruth Bader Ginsburg even says it was badly decided as a matter of constitutional law. So Chuck Schumer says that's going to be their red flag. That's going to be their red line. If in their view, a possible Supreme Court justice just might overturn Roe v. Wade, that's going to be a non-starter for them. If there's even a hint of that on the horizon, they're done with that. They're going to try to block that nominee with everything that they've got. And we'll talk in a little bit, maybe in the last segment in this first hour, about the problems that we may run into with confirming a Trump nominee. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But Schumer, and you're going to hear a lot of Democrats talking about the McConnell rule. We got to follow the McConnell rule. We got to do what the Republicans did in 2016. No nominees in an election year. That's what Chuck Schumer's saying. We cannot consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Now, what he's not telling you is that's a rule. I mean, it's not a rule, but sort of a standard practice in a presidential election year. The standard is you don't consider a nominee for the Supreme Court in a presidential election year because you recognize, look, there's going to be an incoming president, an incoming Congress. They really, a decision this momentous, the next president really should have the say on who becomes the next Supreme Court justice. Now, it's not a rule. It's not a law. If somebody, even in a presidential year, wants to go ahead and make a nomination, there's nothing to prevent that other than custom and tradition. So Trump easily could do that. This is not the kind of election year that we had in 2016. Remember, in 2016, you had a vacancy created by the death of Antonin Scalia. President Obama was the president. He wanted a guy by the name of Merrick Garland to take Antonin Scalia's place, the best jurist that we had in the 20th century. And Obama wanted Merrick Garland, who was a confirmed leftist. I mean, Barack Obama's not going to appoint anybody else. And Garland would have abandoned every single thing that Antonin Scalia did, and he would have issued opinions and rulings and votes that would have been the polar opposite of Antonin Scalia. And Mitch McConnell, Republicans, were in charge of the Senate. Remember, elections have consequences. McConnell and the Republicans were in charge of the Senate. And McConnell said, no, we're not going to hold a hearing on Merrick Garland. This is a presidential election year. We're about ready to have a presidential election. It's either going to be Hillary Clinton or it's going to be Donald Trump. We're going to let the next president make that decision. And realize Mitch McConnell didn't know if it was going to be Trump or if it was going to be Hillary Clinton. So it's not a rule of any kind.
Hey, Brian,
not a McConnell rule or any other kind of rule.
Don't we have either a midterm or presidential election every other year?
Yeah, every other year you've got an election.
So Democrats are basically saying you can only have it in the odd number.
In the odd years.
Okay.
Well, if you try to do it in January, they say, oh, no. You can't do it. This is an election year. Some states have their primaries next month.
Yep.
So they could just lock the thing up completely every other year. About 2 out of every 4 years. No. 1 out of every 4 years. 3 out of every 4 years. 3 out of every 4 years they could completely lock the thing up.
No math.
Yeah, but there's no rule to this effect. And Mitch McConnell said, "Look, we're Republicans. We're in charge of the Senate. The Senate is who confirms justices to the United States Supreme Court. So we are going to give our advice and to President Obama. Remember, their role is to advise and consent." So they said, President Obama, we're giving you some advice. Don't nominate Merrick Garland. That's our advice. That's what the Constitution instructs us to do. So we're giving you some advice, just like the framers told us. And we are not going to give our consent to a guy like Merrick Garland. So that's where we got Neil Gorsuch. So anyway, just realize that you're going to hear ad nauseum about this McConnell rule. It does not exist. Now, let's listen to Jeffrey Toobin. He is the CNN legal analyst for CNN, and he's a gloom and doomer for the people on the left. Here's what he had to say.
Let's talk facts. Let's talk about what America is going to be like that's different. You are going to see 20 states pass laws banning abortion outright, just banning abortion, and because they know that there are now going to be 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. And abortion will be illegal in a significant part of the United States in 18 months. There is just no doubt about that. And that's why these seats matter so much. Because one of my favorite lines about the Supreme Court was by Justice Robert Jackson, who served on the court in the 1940s and 50s. And he said, "We are not final because we are infallible. We are infallible because we are final." Somebody has the last word, and here it's the Supreme Court, and Roe v. Wade is doomed. It is gone because Donald Trump won the election.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Elections have consequences. And you want to know why people like me, I get asked this question by callers. I do radio interviews with people on the left, and they'll ask, well, how can you support a guy like Donald Trump? You look at his past marital history, and I'll tell him, look, I don't support any one single thing he did with a porn star, multiple marriages. I don't endorse that. I don't support that. I don't lionize that. I don't excuse that. I don't pretend that that's okay. But if I have to choose between a Hillary Clinton and a Donald Trump, I'm going to pick a Donald Trump in part because he's going to nominate conservative jurists. That's what he promised, and that's what he has done. He did that with Neil Gorsuch. He kept his promise. And remember, Mitch McConnell was smart enough to get rid of the fake-a-buster for Supreme Court nominations, and they were able to confirm Neil Gorsuch with just 51 votes.
It does raise the question, if he's going to do that, if he sees the advantage of doing away with the fake-a-buster in this, why doesn't he apply that same rule to other things? I mean, obviously he sees that it will work.
Yeah, and it's just that the stuff that we care about, the other stuff that we care about, just aren't important enough to him.
Gotcha.
The Supreme Court thing, that was important to him because he knew he would get crucified if he didn't get rid of that thing so we could get a guy like Gorsuch on the bench.
Okay.
But the things that we care about, like balancing the budget, building the wall, all that kind of stuff, he doesn't care about that stuff enough to get rid of the fake-a-buster rules. So it's just a matter of priorities with him. But, Jeff's right. He's recognizing, he's admitting that this fake-a-buster thing gets in the way of good action. So Toobin is concerned that there'll be 20 states, because what would happen if Roe v. Wade was overturned, the issue would go back to the states. So that's why I don't care who I'm talking to. I don't care what state you live in. Now's the time to begin talking to your representatives and state senators to examine the laws that are on your books in your state about abortion. Because if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the issue will be sent back to the states, and whatever law your state has on the books with regard to abortion, that can go into effect. Now, Mississippi, my state, we've got a law that bans abortions after 15 weeks. Other states have done the same thing. Some states have laws on the books that ban abortions after 20 weeks. Some have heartbeat bills where you ban abortions, like Iowa. You ban abortions, I think it's Iowa, where you ban abortions after you can detect a fetal heartbeat, which is about 6 or 7 weeks. So now's the time to begin making sure that we've got state laws that will, to the best we can do it, outlaw the act of abortion, because that's where it'll wind up. And that's why Toobin is just wringing his hands, and everybody over on the left. Roe v. Wade is doomed. It'll be illegal. Abortion will be illegal in a significant part of the United States in 18 months. And we say, in the name of Jesus Christ, we hope so and we pray. Heavenly Father, we pray that Jeffrey Toobin's words will be in the nature of a prophetic word, that by your grace and power, abortion will in fact be illegal in a significant part of the United States in 18 months. Now, Steve Schmidt is a so-called Republican. He was actually John McCain's campaign manager. And this guy has gone way over to the dark side. He's gone past Darth Vader to the far side of the moon. But he's a talking head on MSNBC. And, the Democrats are still out there saying that you guys stole a Supreme Court seat from us. Well, they didn't. They were exercising the Senate's right, constitutional authority, to advise and consent. But here's Steve Schmidt talking about what he thinks ought to happen.
They stole a Supreme Court seat from the Democrats, and for the fabric of our democracy, Democrats should dig in hard here and do everything they conceivably can do to block this nomination, any nomination, from going forward until after we see what happens in the midterm election. This is also, and I think it's important to point out, a president who is increasingly lawless, who asserts himself to be above the law, who attacks constantly fundamental institutions and pillars in the middle of a criminal investigation that has moved closer and closer and closer to the Oval Office. So there's an enormous amount at stake here, and Democrats, I think, need to hold the line and be very, very tough in this moment, and not allow this to go forward.
Now, Steve Schmidt doesn't tell the Democrats what in the world they can possibly do to stop this thing. Now, Rachel Maddow, you'll hear that after the break. She wants people to lay down on the tracks lie down on the tracks and let the train run over you to stop this thing. That's what she wants liberals to do. But in reality, the only ones that can stop a good judicial nominee from getting confirmed are Republicans. They're the only ones that can do it. And we'll talk about that in this last segment about what the math is when it comes to confirming a good justice. And I'm going to give you a name to start thinking about that I believe is going to be the best choice to be the next Supreme Court justice. We'll talk about that when we come back after the break. Brian Fisher, American Family Radio.
You wish you could stop thinking about it, but you can't. It never quite leaves your thoughts. Even in the joyful moments, it's there. The sadness, shame, and sorrow. You know you can't go on like this, so don't. Phone the International Helpline for Abortion Recovery at 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who's already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
Announcing 3 new episodes of Ryan DeFrades' Secret Agent. These animated half-hour episodes will entertain children.
That's right!
And teach lessons about joy, patience, and the dangers of selfishness. Ryan DeFrades is a secret agent with a whole lot to learn, and he insists on working alone until he's paired with a very unlikely partner.
Mommy!
Ryan DeFrades' Secret Agent, episodes 4, 5, and 6 from American Family Studios are available now at afastore.net.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. You know, we only go to the Holy Land once a year, and that's in March. Last year, we filled up several months in advance. So if you want to go in March of 2019, it's time to look at the details. You can get a brochure from us at 800-FAMILIES, 1-800-FAMILIES, option 5, and leave us your name and your telephone number, or go to twholyland.com, twholyland.com. It's going to be a wonderful time in Israel. We'll go to the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, the holy city of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Masada, the Dead Sea, and on the list goes. If you'd like to go with us in March of 2019, all the information is available at twholyland.com. Order a brochure by calling 800-FAMILIES, option 5.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy, howdy. Welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Listening to Ultra 4K radio, ultra high definition radio. More content per cubic inch of air than any other place on your radio dial. At least that is our goal. If we don't get there, it's not going to be from a lack of intentionality or effort. Now, we've been playing some sound bites from Democrats that are determined to stop. There's really nothing they can do. I mean, there isn't anything. There's no way that the Democrats can stop a Republican nominee from going forward. There just isn't. The Republicans are in charge of the Senate. They control the calendar through Mitch McConnell. Donald Trump's prepared to swear in a nominee of his choice. The Republicans have enough votes, 51, to confirm anybody. If they stick together, they can confirm anybody. They're the only ones that can stop an outstanding nominee from being placed on the Supreme Court. Now, here is Rachel Maddow. Remember, this is the woman that tried to take me completely out of broadcasting, nearly succeeded back in 2015. I mean, she went on a crusade. I mean, it was scorched earth. She tried to rid the land of yours truly, but I did manage to barely survive. Pretty vicious onslaught from her. Anyway, here she is talking about what Democrats ought to do at this point in history.
Democrats don't like to break precedent. They don't like to do radical things. But the whole reason Neil Gorsuch is there and Merrick Garland isn't is because Republicans acted so radically when Anthony Scalia died in the spring of 2016. So Democrats are going to have to figure out how hard they want to fight and whether that limiter is something that's going to keep them from hitting top speed. I think a lot of the Democratic base right now is going to expect them to all but lay their bodies on the line to stop the Senate rather than allow any nominee to go forward.
All right, lay their bodies on the line, throw them on the tracks. I got a note from the executive producer who wonders if Rachel Maddow is going to lead the pack in lying down on the tracks, or if she's simply going to stand with her camera crew on the sidelines and watch other people get run over by the locomotive. So anyway, got to fight hard. You got to give it everything you've got. You got to fight hard. You got to stop this thing, whatever you got to do. That's what the base is expecting you to do. In other words, she's setting something that basically is impossible for the Democrats to do on their own, and that is to stop this nominee from going forward. They're going to have to get Republican complicity to do it. So she's kind of setting the expectation up that there's something Democrats can do to stop this nomination. They can't. So their base is expecting that they can do it. If they don't, their base will have another reason to be upset with their own leadership. Now, Chris Matthews is a reliable conservative. I love listening to this guy. He got real short with his colleagues. I didn't reserve the soundbite, but he was snapping at everybody on this set. He is ticked because they know they're losing control of the Supreme Court. And one thing you will hear in soundbite after soundbite after soundbite is the Democrats think that the Supreme Court is a super legislature. And you hear them talking about the fact that the Supreme Court is where they go to get what they want. They don't go to Congress because Congress can be overruled by the Supreme Court. So for them, the Holy Grail is to get control of the Supreme Court. That's how they can get everything they want. They can't get it through the legislature because their policies are unpopular with too many people. So they go to the Supreme Court, and now they're facing the horror, the absolute utter horror. They're looking into the abyss here, ladies and gentlemen, that they will lose control of their cherished Supreme Court. Now, Chris Matthews is in line with Rachel Maddow and others. Let's listen.
To give this to the Republicans when they control the Senate basically 51 or 50 to 49, really, with John McCain perhaps not voting again, to give them this last chance to pack the court 5-4 again, hard conservative. I say this, the base will attack the leadership for this if they allow it to happen, and they should, because this is time for vengeance.
This is time for vengeance for what happened 2 years ago. So Chris Matthews says, we got to do payback. The Republicans robbed us of that seat through their shenanigans with Merrick Garland. They had the temerity to believe the Constitution that they had the right to give advice and consent to the president. And they said, our advice is don't nominate Merrick Garland because we're not going to give you our consent. But to the Democrats, that's like stealing something, acting on the constitutional prerogative and with constitutional authority. So Chris Matthews says we gotta get involved in payback here. We have to pay them back for what they did to us 2 years ago, and the base should stop the leadership. Which the base is expecting the leadership to get it straight. The base is expecting the leadership here to stop this thing in its tracks. The same siren song that Rachel Maddow has been singing. Well, let's look for a little bit about where we are at on the whole business of Supreme Court nominations.
You almost expect the Democrats to start a special counsel or something.
Well, you wonder what they're going to do. I mean, I do not know. I don't know what aces they have up their sleeves, but and Jeff, you make an interesting observation about the irony of what Chuck Schumer was talking about in his soundbite about, on the one hand, talking about abortion, and then on the other hand, talking about Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two hills that they've decided to plant their flags on. One claiming that they're fighting for the health and wealth, the health of Americans. On the other hand, they want to fight for killing babies.
For killing babies.
That doesn't make
so
any
on the one hand, we're for human health. On the other hand, we're for slaughtering unborn children.
There's the demonstration of the Democratic platform right there.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that, you scratch just a little bit below the surface in any kind of liberal point of view, regressive point of view. By the way, I read Rush Limbaugh's transcript last night. He used the word regressive. So I've got to convert to the regressive lexicology to describe Democrats and liberals. They are regressives because they are going in the wrong direction. They think they're progressives, think they're taking us forward. They're not. They are taking us backward. Now, let's go ahead and get into the Kornacki clips. And I may have to save some of the content about who to look for as a nominee. But Steve Kornacki's on MSNBC, and he's parsing out here the impact of this vacancy on the upcoming election. So let's listen. We've got two sound bites here. Here's the first one talking about Republican side.
So first, let's look at this from the Democrat standpoint. If they want to pick off this nominee, beat it somehow, here's what they need. They got their 49. They want to hold those together. And then what? Where could they look? They got to pick off Republicans somewhere. Where could they look? Dean Heller running for re-election in Nevada. Nevada, a state that Hillary Clinton carried. A Clinton state Republican running for re-election. Could Democrats raise the political temperature enough in that state to make Heller think it's in his political interest to vote with them and against this nominee? That's a tough road to hoe, but that's something to think about. How about Corker and Flake? These are two senators who have certainly had their differences with Donald Trump, who are not running for re-election, who do not have to face the voters, do not have to face Republican primary voters. Maybe there's some burst of independence there on their part, and they feel it's time to make some kind of a statement. How about Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski? They're not up for re-election. They are pro-choice. We talked about that issue of abortion, Roe versus Wade, how that factors in critically to this nomination. Potentially, would one of them say on the basis of that issue, or maybe something else? They've had their differences as well with their party and the conservative base before. Maybe one of them. And then McCain. You remember last year, McCain, that thumbs down on health care. Maybe he could emerge somehow. Keep in mind, though, all of these Republicans were yes votes on Neil Gorsuch last year.
But there's going to be more pressure on him this year than there was with Neil Gorsuch 2 years ago. This is, like Jeff said, they are going to die on this hill. The Democrats are going to die on the hill of stopping a pro-life nominee from getting on the Supreme Court. And Steve Kornacki talking about the possible Republican targets, and he's right about this. Any one of these people is somewhat vulnerable. I don't think Dean Heller is going to flop. Donald Trump has invested a good deal of effort in helping him, endorsing him. We'll see what happens in his election, but he is the current senator from the state of Nevada. And I don't see him bucking Donald Trump at this stage. I think he will be a vote for a pro-life candidate. But Bob Corker, that guy's off the reservation. Who knows where he's going to come down? Jeff Flake has committed himself to opposing the president on judicial nominations. He's making that kind of the banner that he marches behind. Until I get a vote on tariffs, I'm not going to vote for a single one of Donald Trump's nominations. So he's a guy just out of spite could make a bad vote. Then you've got Murkowski and Collins. They're both pro-abortion. So they're the ones that I'm the most worried about because there's going to be intense pressure on them, a lot of expectation, a lot of pressure on them to vote for abortion here. So they're the ones to watch, Murkowski and Collins. McCain probably won't even be there given his health. So that means they've only got 50 votes in the Senate. Now let's clip 7. This is the second Kornacki clip talking about the math on the Democrat side.
Keep in mind, Democrats can try to pick off Republicans. They got to worry about their own. Joe Manchin running for re-election in a state Donald Trump won by 42 points. Heidi Heitkamp in a state Trump won by 36. Joe Donnelly in a state Trump carried by 20. They'll be weeks away from facing the voters, maybe days away. Do they want to break with the Trump administration, side with Democrats, and blockade a nominee of this administration? That would be a tough vote to sell in those states. So Democrats.
All right, so Kornacki pointing out that, there are some possible pickoffs on the Democrat side. These individuals could be persuaded to vote for a conservative, originalist, Antonin Scalia-type jurist. You could have Joe Manchin. Donald Trump carried West Virginia by 42 points. That's Custer at the Little Bighorn in political matters. And Manchin has been sending a lot of conservative signals. He knows he's got to get conservative votes to win. He's very vulnerable. I think there's a good chance that Joe Manchin will vote for a pro-life jurist. Heidi Heitkamp, I have no idea where she's going to come out. But Donald Trump won North Dakota by 36 points. Joe Donnelly from Indiana, which is a conservative state, a pro-life state. I think Joe Donnelly could be persuaded. Trump won there by 20 points. So we'll see how it all shakes out. When we come back, I'm going to give you a quick breakdown on who I think the candidate to look for is. We'll give you that after we listen to the news. You're listening to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Obviously, the replacement for Judge Anthony Kennedy is critical. That's what we've been talking about this first hour. We will start taking your calls in the next hour. Number to call if you want to get in the queue is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Hello, this is Dr. Ronnie Floyd, President of the National Day of Prayer Task Force. In the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers acknowledged God. As we celebrate our nation's independence, please remember to pray for our nation and its leaders and ask God for His guidance and continued blessing. A reminder from American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Speculation is underway for a replacement for Justice Anthony Kennedy, who announced his retirement Wednesday. Senator Mike Lee, on the White House's short list used to select Justice Neil Gorsuch last year, spoke to Fox and Friends about his relationship with the president.
I have a good relationship with the president. He and I don't see eye to eye on every issue, but on the whole, I've supported his efforts to restore federalism, to restore separation of powers. These are different ways of saying just drain the swamp.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says a vote on Kennedy's successor will happen this fall. A summit between President Trump and his Russian counterpart is set for next month. John Decker reports.
President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to meet July 16th in Helsinki, Finland, with national security on the agenda. In the past 6 months, the Trump administration has imposed sanctions on Russia as punishment for meddling in the 2016 election. Despite that, President Trump has expressed a strong interest in improving relations with Russia and suggested last month that it be allowed back into the G7. Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, saying in a statement, "I fear that this summit will prove to be another blow to NATO and our allies, and a gift to the Kremlin." At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
A conservative political analyst says even though the Democratic Party are somewhat self-destructive, their hatred for Donald Trump has them fired up heading into the 2018 midterms. Chad Groening has more.
The Democrats have not had much good news lately. In Tuesday night's latest string of primaries, President Donald Trump celebrated a big night as the candidates he backed in major races came out victorious, while a key Democrat suffered defeat at the hands of a socialist. Joe Crowley, a 10-term Democrat, lost to radical left-wing self-proclaimed socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who campaigned on the platform of abolishing U.S. immigration and customs enforcement and implementing universal health care. Tom Palkin is a former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas and was a Trump delegate at the 2016 Republican National Convention.
The Democrats are somewhat self-destructing. You have a situation in New York, a congressman who is really almost the favorite to defeat Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic caucus. If the Democrats won control of the House, he's knocked out by a Bernie Sanders socialist. So they have their own problems with the extreme left, clearly winning a few primaries around the country. And that was a key one and a big surprise.
But Palkin says it is these far-left radicals who are fired up.
What I worry about is the intensity of the left and the kind of money they've got behind them, and that you've got all these leftist organizations that have tons of money. This is really a pitched battle, and the conservatives had better wake up and realize these people don't care about meeting in the middle. They just care about running over the other side.
I'm Chad Groening.
The Chicago City Council will approve a $2.5 million settlement for a family that attorneys say was terrorized by Chicago police 4 years ago. The family alleges their case is not isolated, and there is a pattern of such behavior around children. The family's attorney, Al Hofeld Jr., says the young child in this case still suffers from nightmares following that incident.
She saw the gun pointed at her, point blank. She saw the gun pointed at her grandmother's head. She saw her mother, who was already handcuffed, assaulted by the police. And then, as if all of that wasn't bad enough, she sees and hears an officer trampling her toys, breaking her toys. She sees furniture and toys flying out of her bedroom.
The precedent-setting lawsuit alleges that police violated the civil rights of the family. And Kroger is about to test whether it can steer supermarket customers away from crowded grocery stores with a fleet of small, driverless cars designed to lower delivery costs. The test program announced today would make Kroger the first U.S. grocer to make deliveries with robotic cars that won't have a human riding along to take control in case something goes wrong. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Who is God? What is He like? How can we know? Your answer to these questions will impact your worship, discipleship, apologetics, and evangelism. Learn from Ravi Zacharias, Josh McDowell, Chip Ingram, and more than 60 other speakers at Southern Evangelical Seminary's 25th Annual National Conference on Christian Apologetics. It's October 12th and 13th in Charlotte, North Carolina. Get the early bird discount when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
There are now going to be 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
This is the most important Supreme Court vacancy for this country in at least a generation.
You are going to see 20 states pass laws banning abortion outright.
They stole a Supreme Court seat from the Democrats.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
Roe v. Wade is doomed.
This is time for vengeance.
Democrats should dig in hard here and do everything they conceivably can do to block this nomination.
The whole reason Neil Gorsuch is there and Merrick Garland isn't is because Republicans acted so radically.
The left is in full meltdown mode.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Glad to have you in the conversation no matter how you got here. Live streaming us on Facebook, live streaming us on YouTube, catching us on a podcast. Remember, you can go to the Focal Point page or you can go to the AFR.net webpage, hit the AFR Talk button, scroll down, find the podcast button. If you go to the Facebook page, click on the Learn More button right on the banner, and it'll take you right to the podcast. So glad to have you. Got a lot of people following us on podcasts. Encourage you to do that. You could be listening on one of our 184 stations that comprise the American Family Radio Network. You could be following us as you're going around with an app for the iPhone, for the Android. You could be audio streaming us through your computer at afr.net. Anyway, however you happen to be in the conversation, we are glad you are there. Now, I want to talk in this segment. There's one thing I want to cover, and the number, by the way, if you want to call, again, please be patient. We're going to try to get to as many of your calls as we can, but if you'd like to get in the queue to be on the air, give us a call at 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. And I think primarily the thing that we want to talk about is the Supreme Court. So those are the kind of calls that I'm looking for primarily at this point. As we talk about other topics as the hour progresses, we'll open up the range of topics we'll take phone calls on. But I'd like to hear from you about the Supreme Court nominations. Now, Susan Collins worries me a lot. And here's why. This is a piece from The Hill. Susan Collins said on Wednesday, that's yesterday, she believes that Roe v. Wade is settled legal precedent. And she believes judges should respect precedent. Quote, I view Roe v. Wade as being settled law. We've been over this before. It's not possible for the Supreme Court to issue settled law. Doesn't have that authority. According to the Constitution, Article 1, all legislative power, meaning every last bit of it, is vested in a Congress. So the Supreme Court can't settle law even if it wanted to. So that's where she's got a basic, fundamental, profound misunderstanding of the Constitution and the authority of the court. But anyway, that's the way she views it. Nobody can stop her from viewing things wrongly and falsely if she chooses to. And she says it's clearly precedent. I always, emphasis on always, look for judges who respect precedent. So I think Susan Collins is somebody to really watch and really worry about. Lisa Murkowski, I think, is another one to keep an eye on. You know, one other possibility is that John McCain could resign. He could resign and allow a conservative senator to be appointed in his place who could actually be on the floor. Remember, Senator McCain can't vote unless he's actually physically present on the Senate floor. You can't delegate that, the right to vote, to anybody else. You got to physically be there to vote, or you don't get to vote. You can't have a proxy do it for you. So one possibility would be for McCain to realize the inevitable and do the Republicans and justice in the country a solid by stepping down and allowing a pro-life senator to be appointed in his place. Now, here's the deal. I think you're going to hear two names bandied about. I'm looking at a short list on Hot Air that have several other names on it. Thomas Hardiman is another guy to watch. But here are the two that I think are going to be the leading contenders for this position. One is Brett Kavanaugh. He is currently on the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is the most significant court of appeals because all of the stuff that involves D.C. and congressional law goes to that court. So that's a very influential court. He's on that Court of Appeals. The other one is Amy Coney Barrett. She's on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, has been on there for about 1 year. Now, if you compare these two, I've got some real problems with Kavanaugh. Here's a breakdown produced by Philip Uregi of the Judicial Action Group. And Kavanaugh was the one that laid the groundwork for Chief Justice Roberts to declare that the Obamacare mandate was a tax. The thinking that was behind that came from a brief submitted, came from an opinion by Kavanaugh, who had previously been claiming that Obamacare was a tax. Now, I guarantee you, I do not want anybody on the Supreme Court that had one single solitary thing to do with giving Supreme Court approval to Obamacare. And Brett Kavanaugh, right in the middle of that thing, John Roberts relied on his opinion in order to find that it was a tax. That's a non-starter for me. Whereas Barrett criticized Roberts' opinion that this was a tax in the Obamacare case. So Barrett on the side of the angels on that one, and Kavanaugh not on the side of whoever's on the other side. So what Barrett said, the majority did not enact a tax. The statute, there's no opportunity to impose a tax. It lacks democratic legitimacy. All right, so big separation there. Kavanaugh, in a case not too long ago that had to do with the southern border, he said this in his opinion: the unlawful immigrant minor, listen to this, is assumed to have a right under precedent to an abortion. Remember, they're hustling these illegal alien girls who are pregnant. They're hustling them off to abortion centers to get their baby aborted. And Kavanaugh says he's down with that. They have an assumed right under Supreme Court rulings to have an abortion. So I don't want a Supreme Court justice to have anything to do with these illegal alien women having an opportunity to abort their children. So Kavanaugh is out. Elizabeth Barrett is on the side of the angels on this one. She believes that Roe v. Wade is judicially, societally, and morally incorrect. She believes it is not settled, the issue of abortion is not settled by society, and therefore may be reversed. So she's not of the ilk, there's that word again, ilk. She is not of the ilk that Roe v. Wade is settled law or settled precedent. She believes it may be reversed because society is still wrestling with that issue. Now, Kavanaugh, on the issue of whether it's a priest for life case about whether companies can be ordered to buy abortifacients or provide it for their employees, he conceded that the government does have a compelling interest in forcing religious organizations to facilitate contraception. He conceded that. He admitted that. I don't want a justice on the Supreme Court's got anything to do with saying that there is some kind of assumed right for the government to force anybody to provide abortifacients for their employees. And Barrett, on the other hand, opposed the Obamacare requirement that employers provide contraceptives. So just in general, Amy Coney Barrett, three names, Amy Coney Barrett, is a much better prospect than Judge Brett Kavanaugh and is the best prospect on Donald Trump's entire list of 25 potential nominees to to the Supreme Court. This according to Philip Uribe of the Judicial Action Council. Great guy, smart guy, really worth listening to. And he's thinking, and he's suggesting that Amy Coney Barrett is the best selection of all the ones on Donald Trump's list of 25. She's just 46, so she easily could be on the Supreme Court for another 3 years. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about Amy Coney Barrett when I come back. She's solid. I'm rooting for her. Wanted to get her name in front of you. Amy Coney Barrett is my pick, along with Philip Uribe, for the next Supreme Court justice. Be right back.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
In a few weeks, we are releasing Big Brother in the Exam Room, The Dangerous Truth About Electronic Health Records. This groundbreaking book, written by yours truly, details the history, clinical chaos, intrusions, safety hazards, and costs of the government EHR, the government-mandated surveillance system imposed by Congress that has turned doctors into data clerks and government reporters. It has allowed outsiders and black box algorithms to control your doctor's treatment decisions and to penalize doctors financially if they don't conform. The book also has a list of specific action steps you can take to protect yourself. If you want to know when it's available, go to bigbrotherintheexamroom.com.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
Dan Celia of Financial Issues.
I think income ultimately is the most important thing that we protect. I know one thing, and I know this from sitting across a lot of tables from a lot of people over the years, that at some point in time, maybe it's 75, maybe it's 85, there will be a point in time where the only thing you care about is how much income you have coming in. Don't let your portfolio be 100% subject to the volatility in the markets or dependent upon the market. Shore up some permanent income, along with Social Security and your maybe a pension. Have some charitable gift annuity to shore that up. I hope you'll call the AFA Foundation today and find out more detail about a charitable gift annuity.
Call and speak with a representative of the AFA Foundation at 800-326-4543, extension 345.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Here's a left-wing pastor, Talbert W. Swan II. He's a pastor, a bishop, and assistant general secretary with the Liberal Church of God in Christ denomination. Some of those churches are conservative. He's part of a denomination that isn't. He tweeted out that if heaven is going to be full of American evangelicals, I will take my chances on hell. You might be careful, Bishop Swan. You just might get what you're asking for. Looking here at a survey, a poll on trust in the media, 92% of Republicans and 79% of independents believe, listen to this, that mainstream media organizations knowingly report false or misleading stories. 92% of Republicans, 79% of independents, and check this out, 53% of Democrats. Overall, 72% of Americans believe that the talking snake media is lying to them. That's why I call it the talking snake media. What did the talking snake do in the garden? Lied through his teeth. Got them to believe lies, and then he had control. All right, so anyway, there's a level of confidence. That's a staggering number. 72% of Americans, 92% of Republicans do not trust the media, believe it is that they are intentionally misleading. Now, very quickly, to finish, close the loop on Amy Coney Barrett, and then I'm going to go to the phones. She believes, this is just a quick rundown, just take 30 seconds. She believes that Supreme Court justices should adhere to the rule of law and should not impose their political preferences through rulings. She also believes that justices must simply apply the Constitution. She properly criticized Roberts' opinion in the Obamacare case on the transgender bathroom case, she said that the intent of Congress and the text do not require that males be allowed to use female bathrooms. She believes that Roe was created by, quote, judicial fiat. It's not settled law, therefore may be reversed. She believes that it's the duty of judges to follow the text of the Constitution over contrary court precedent. Again, I repeat, this is fundamental. This is absolutely fundamental. She believes that a judge's duty is to follow the text of the Constitution, even if there is a court precedent that says the other thing. You got to follow the Constitution, not judicial precedent. That's very, very important. She believes life begins at conception, and she accurately characterized Justice Kennedy as a moderate and not as a conservative. So Amy Coney Barrett, I believe, is the judge of choice. Let's grab some calls. Let's go to Chris in Carmel, Indiana. Chris, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say thank you for taking my call. Brian, I just wanted to observe and say the lower court, district court judges in the federal judiciary hasn't been very friendly to the Constitution, nor the decisions that they're making at the lower court level. If the Democrats actually obstruct, like they said they're going to, it sounds like they're going to fall on swords for this one, how is that going to impede, and when will the Supreme Court start hearing other cases that have to go up to them? And will that affect, the outcomes? Because if we have a 4-4 tie, the lower court's decision always takes the precedent and wins.
Yeah.
So, you got to wonder how long they're going to really do that.
Yeah. Well, and they've been doing their dead level best to obstruct judicial nominees as it is. They've been demanding the entire 30 hours of debate, even though they don't use them. It's just like the fake-a-buster. We want 30 hours of debate, and then they just gum things up. Everybody sits around and waits for 30 hours to go by before they can vote, and then they got to do the same thing with the next nominee, and Mitch McConnell's letting them do it. He could change the rules. He could limit it to 2 hours of debate for appeals court, 8 hours for Supreme Court, or whatever. They could change those rules this afternoon if they wanted to and ungum the whole process, but the Democrats are apparently determined to do it, and Mitch McConnell is not prepared to budge in the interest of making it easier to get Trump's nominees confirmed. He is going to keep them in town through August, so that's going to be a big help, and the reason for that is because the Democrats have so gummed things up. If they're going to get those nominees confirmed, they're going to have to meet during their summer August recess. So I don't know what the question is. I don't know what the answer to your question is, Chris. I do know, this is a little bit tangential to what you were talking about, but Donald Trump is loading up the lower courts with good judges. I mean, he's looking beyond just the Supreme Court. He knows that Supreme Court nominees come from somewhere, and most of them come from appeals courts. They get promoted from the appeals courts to the Supreme Court, so he's trying to load them up with really good jurists off this list from the Federalist Society. Okay, Chris, great question. Let's grab a call from Mary in Palmers, Texas. Mary, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
About the abortion issue being overturned. I'm in my 70s, and I don't understand. I think it's 30 to 60 million abortions here of American babies. And to me, that is like a genocide of a certain group of people. But in my days, there was birth control women could do, and the main thing was you didn't have sex until you got married to have children. And our society is turned upside down, thinking that you make a mistake and the best option is an abortion. Mm-hmm. And I think America needs to get back. Well, Pandora's out of the box, and so I guess there is no going back. But I know Obama had his chance to stack our courts with activists, and now it's our turn to stack the courts with those that will rule by the Constitution and not by their political leanings. Thank you.
All right, Mary, I appreciate the call. You're exactly right. And this is, I understand what you're saying. I mean, maybe the proverbial cat is out of the proverbial bag and we can't stuff him back in there. But we got to keep sending the message, because there's a whole bunch of reasons not to engage in premarital sex. I mean, the list is as long as your arm. And they're valid reasons. I mean, it's against God's will. That's a pretty profound reason not to do it. But you have the risk of pregnancy, obviously, a crisis pregnancy. You have the risk of sexually transmitted diseases. You have a risk of broken hearts. You have a risk of cohabitation being something that's a training ground for divorce and not for marriage. I mean, the list just goes on and on. So I appreciate the call, Mary. You know, and people say that it's impossible. You can't expect teenagers to be sexually abstinent. Well, Mary said, I grew up in a time where that was the norm. So obviously it's possible. Let's not hear that talk that nobody can do it. And I'll tell you, teenagers are doing it every day today. Millions of them every day today are practicing chastity and abstinence. All right, let's go to Randy in Springfield, Missouri. Randy, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate you pointing out the media narrative in regards to this, one of the Supreme Court justices that were being mentioned as a possible candidate. I wanted to point out about another candidate that was a nominee from the last time during Mr. Gorsuch's tenure, which was William Pryor. I'm sure he's going to be one of the people on the short list. According to Personhood USA, they did an article on him a year ago where he had 2 or 3 different cases where he was citing and leaning toward abortion rights in those cases. I know he has a reputation for being pro-life, and so I thought that was kind of important. And as well, there's an investigative reporter named Wayne Manson, and he was the first person to break the story on the former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, and him having an alternative lifestyle. William Pryor was mentioned as one of the people he used to hang around, so that would be somebody I would be very suspect about as far as a finalist in Judge or President Trump's decision-making for Supreme Court justice.
Okay, good, Randy. Appreciate the call. And Randy is exactly right. William Pryor was the favorite of a lot of conservatives, and then he started to make a number of rulings that were very problematic. You know, Randy says they had to do in general with the pro-life issue. I cannot for the life of me remember the specifics, but I do remember that there was legitimate concern about the nature of some of his rulings. So I think William Pryor's off the list. I mean, there just simply is no reason for us to like a possible judge about whom there are significant questions when we can get somebody like an Amy Coney Barrett about whom there are no questions. Great call, Randy. I appreciate it. Let's grab a call from Tom in Circleville, Ohio. Tom, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, thank you for taking my call. Love your show.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, I'm just tired of the Democrats saying that the Republicans stole this seat. They were going to wait till after the election, and then that would have, in their mind, Hillary was going to win. So I don't know what now they're complaining about it, saying that they stole our Supreme Court seat. Well, their candidate didn't win. And I'll tell you, when I found out that, when I heard the news that Kennedy was retiring, I got giddy like a school kid, man. I was excited, because of what it means to the future of our country.
Yes.
And just your thoughts on the fact that the Democrats' accusation that they stole the election, I think, rings hollow to me.
Yeah, absolutely does. They would have done exactly the same thing in reverse and would have been constitutionally entitled to do it. I appreciate it, Tom. You know, in fact, I got a letter or an email from a listener who was complaining, guys, about the fact that we were celebrating yesterday over the good news, over the good things that had happened. And I said, well, the joy of the Lord is our strength, and joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. We had a lot to celebrate.
That's right.
So that's why we did it, because there was a lot to celebrate.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I mean, there was a lot of bad news that we've had to endure for many years, and so why not?
Yeah, I got 4 or 5 pieces of winnable war news in a row, and woo!
And besides that, the Democrats and those on the left haven't been this mad since last week. So, I mean, really.
Yeah. Well, they belong to the Church of Perpetual Outrage.
Yeah.
That's where they worship, and they are faithful in attendance at the Church of Perpetual Outrage. We're going to see more of that. Bruce in Andalusia, Alabama, if you can hang on, I'll take you coming out of the break, and we'll take more calls. Number to call is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Like to take your calls about Supreme Court nominations. We're We're going to be talking about some other things. We talked about media, the talking snake media, how 92% of Republicans don't trust them. And ladies and gentlemen, if I can make a plug for Focal Point, that's why you need to listen here.
Yeah.
Because we're going to filter through the news. We're going to sort out the stuff that's bilge. We'll identify the bilge for you if it's necessary, and then we're going to give you the undiluted truth so you can't be misled by the voices that you hear out there in our culture. Number to call is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. We'll be right back with more content, more calls. Stay with us. Brian Fisher, American Family Radio.
Sheila Harper suffered the childhood trauma of a deadly car accident which took her mother's life at age 4. Hi, Kim Katola for Cradle My Heart today. Eventually, she found safe haven with relatives and even came to faith in Jesus Christ at age 12. But when she left for college, poor choices led to pregnancy and abortion at age 19. For Sheila, the downward spiral afterwards included drug abuse, credit card abuse, and inappropriate relationships. Yet through it all, God's love carried her. Marriage and motherhood brought Sheila full circle. Her second son was born on the same date as that abortion years earlier. She says God often speaks, heals much, and redirects life circumstances through children and pregnancies. Sheila now leads an international outreach to help women and men hurt by abortion. For more of her story, visit us online at cradlemyheart.org. Saving lives and healing hearts after abortion, one story at a time. cradlemyheart.org.
Here on American Family Radio, this is David Wolin with Haven Ministries, inviting you to anchor your day in God's Word. Deferred gratification isn't easy, especially when you're a kid. Saving for the future sounds boring. A month might as well be a decade. As adults, our sense of time is a little more developed, and yet, last year, in just the United States, credit card debt topped $1 trillion. Here's the truth. We overvalue the things of this world. We overindulge ourselves. But none of the things you and I could buy with a credit card will last. As the Apostle Paul said, the time is short, for this world in its present form is passing away. So today, are your eyes focused on Jesus? Are you living life in light of eternity, or just living for yourself? Get Anchor Devotional today, in print every month. Visit getanchor.com.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher.
Brian J. Fisher.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. A couple of quick items. Number to call, by the way, 888-589-8840. Just a piece of news. Netflix is under investigation. They've got a movie up that actually streams child porn. This is Netflix. They're streaming child pornography right now. Somebody ought to go to prison behind that. And, you know, if you get that, people are sending the clip around so people can see what it is. Don't do it, and don't send it. Because if you do that, you have it on your computer, you send it, you can be charged for violating child pornography laws. So that's Netflix, distributing child porn for profit. Just a factoid, we've been talking about President Trump's Muslim travel ban. You know how many Muslims are affected by this? Everybody's calling it a Muslim travel ban. I got no problem with that, because if we want to ban Muslims, we can. That's where the threat is coming to our national security. But only 8% of the world's Muslims are impacted by Donald Trump's, quote, Muslim travel ban. 1.6 million people, Muslims in the world. This just impacts 8.2% of all of the Muslims in the world. And then, you know, and one of the reasons I said that we need to get a Muslim, I think we ought to have a Muslim immigration ban. I've said this virtually since we started the program. Here's a story out of Pakistan. 3 Muslim seminarians, 3 Muslims in training to become imams, sexually assaulted a 5-year-old boy, which the Quran and Islam teaches is just fine. North Korea is continuing to build a nuclear research facility according to satellite pictures, despite their pledge to denuclearize. So that's going on over there in North Korea. All right, let's grab a couple of quick phone calls. Let's go to Joe. Let's go to Joe in Fort Hood, Texas. Joe, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian. What's on my mind is I think we got to slow down a little bit with all of this. Let's overturn Roe v. Wade, for the simple fact that we haven't made abortion unfathomable in the minds of the American people. And until that happens, an overturning of Roe v. Wade really isn't going to mean much, because I think it's just going to be more of an uphill battle, more protests, more everything. And so I think we should not just work to overturn Roe v. Wade with Supreme Court nominations, but also at the grassroots level continue to organize organizations like Preborn and those type of things, and get that message out, because it's really working among the younger generations. The younger generations are waking up to what abortion really is. And so, until the majority of Americans understand that abortion is murder, flat out, you just can't go around killing babies. Until we understand that, anything that we can overturn in the courts, it'll be challenged and challenged and challenged again. The defunding of Planned Parenthood.
Well, Joe, let me interject here. See, I agree with you. It's a political issue as well as a judicial issue. And ultimately, you got to get the American people behind something this massive. I understand that. We need to continue to educate. We are winning the hearts and minds of the American people on the abortion issue. Increasing numbers of Americans are pro-life. But here's the thing I'd want you to consider, Joe. If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, all that will do is send the issue back to the states. And the states then will be able to pass whatever legislation regarding abortion they want to. And that would be the time then each state, all 50 states, will have this debate. They'll have this discussion. They'll be making this decision. And I think if the Supreme Court says it's okay, you can pass a law that bans abortions, and it's not going to get overturned at the Supreme Court. It's not going to be challengeable because the Supreme Court will have ruled. There's no point in contesting this because the Supreme Court has already said states can ban abortion. Then I think it may release a lot of energy to get good pro-life legislation on the books. All right, thanks, Joe. Let's go to Warren in Belton, Texas. Warren, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hey, I wanted to let you know about a thing that my wife and I have been doing for a number of years. We came across a prayer in the Scripture. If you want to take a look at 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 31. And this is in reference to the time when David was forced to leave Jerusalem with the coup d'etat of his son Absalom. And David found out that a counselor who had been faithful with David decided to transfer over to Absalom. And the counselor's name was Ahithophel.
Uh-huh.
And so when David found this out, he prayed to God, and he said, "Dear God, please make or change the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness."
Yes.
And it worked for him, so my wife and I, for a number of years, we've been doing that. We prayed that Obama's work and those who counseled him would be, that their counsel would be foolish, the same for Hillary. And to me, it's very interesting. You played clips about the left. I haven't heard any of them call and say, we need to go to prayer about the coming decision. So I believe that's what we would do as evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
And if we encourage others to turn to that scripture passage and consider if they want to use it too.
Okay, very good, Warren. I appreciate that. 2 Samuel 15:31. And it's a powerful prayer to pray. I've prayed that often when I've been in a situation where I know there are opposing sides in a culture war issue, and the other side is meeting and they're making their plans. I've often prayed that exact same prayer that Warren is talking about, that God would turn their counsel into foolishness. Okay, thank you, Warren. That is a great call. Appreciate that. Let's. I got a couple of sound bites. We'll take your calls on the same topic, but I want to shift gears just for a second. Martha McCallum had an interesting conversation with Lindsey Graham last night on this FBI thing. And the first thing is an excerpt from Martha McCallum herself on this FBI investigation, this investigation into Trump, the Trump-Russia collusion, and all that. And it's turning out that there's strong evidence that there was a real entrapment effort on the part of the FBI, that they were sending one person after another to contact members of the Trump campaign to try to entrap them, claiming to offer enticing information about Hillary Clinton in order to get them colluding. So the initiative was not coming from the Trump campaign. And here's what Martha McCallum, she's referring to a piece on a website called Real Clear Investigations. Let's listen.
A new piece by Real Clear Investigations, very interesting story, quotes a former FBI agent as saying that he sees that there were 7 attempts, really, by U.S. intelligence and Clinton operatives to essentially entrap members of the Trump campaign. This former agent's name is Mark Walk, and he says, quote, what appear to have been repeated attempts to implicate the Trump campaign in some sort of quid pro quo arrangement with the Russians, who claim to have dirt on Hillary, look like efforts to manufacture evidence against members of the Trump campaign or create pretexts to investigate it.
Okay, so 7 attempts to entrap the Trump campaign, to claim to offer dirt, get some member of the Trump campaign to go for it, and then manufacture evidence against the Trump campaign. That shows you that they've got nothing. That shows you that the FBI has got nothing on Trump colluding with the Russians. They have to manufacture whatever evidence they are trying to use. All right, let's go to clip number 9. This is Martha McCallum talking here with Senator Lindsey Graham.
Here's what's important. July the 31st, they clear Clinton. Now, let me tell you this. If you had done what she had done with her email systems and compromised classified information, you would not have been cleared. So they could not stop Trump if they found her guilty of abusing classified information. So there was no way in hell they were going to find Clinton liable if the goal was to stop Trump because you're giving him the election. Yeah. The question now is about the Russian investigation. Was it a counterintelligence investigation where they were worried about Russia trying to penetrate the Trump campaign? If that's the reason they investigated the Trump campaign, they should have told the Trump campaign, hey, there's some people associated with Russia that you need to be aware of. The fact that they never told the Trump campaign about the investigation is very curious to me.
Well, and I think he's right about that, because their responsibility, if they discover that somebody is nosing around any presidential campaign as an agent of a foreign government, they have a sworn ethical, moral, legal duty to warn that campaign. And they didn't do it, which tells me that they didn't have any evidence that foreign entities were trying to do this. They were the ones that were sending the people to try to entrap people in the Trump campaign by dangling dirt on Hillary Clinton. It wasn't the Russians doing it. They were doing it because they had nothing. They had no Russians trying to entrap members of the Trump campaign. Now, here is a second clip from Lindsey Graham, Martha McCallum talking here, and Lindsey Graham makes a great point here. You know, you've got this kind of reprehensible activity on the part of the FBI actually colluding to try to impact an American election. And what do you hear from the talking snake media? Crickets. Let's listen.
So we'll see what Mr. Mueller does, but I'm shocked that nobody in your business, really outside of Fox News, seems to give a that the head investigator for the FBI wanted to stop Trump and basically bastardized an investigation of Clinton, had a bias that was beyond belief.
Well, I mean, if there was any attempt to influence.
All right, so, you know, Graham pointing out, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, the question answers itself. Why they, I mean, this is the reason that 92% of Republicans don't trust them. Here you got this, what ought to be a major story, where you got the FBI, our leading investigative law enforcement agency in the country, and rather than trying to investigate criminal behavior, they are engaging in criminal behavior by trying to stop a qualified candidate from being elected president of the United States. I mean, that's a scandal. You know, I mean, Watergate was a third-rate burglary, and they didn't actually get anything. When they broke into the Democratic offices, they didn't get anything. That was a third-rate burglary that got nothing. So the only crime there was trying to cover up that third-rate burglary. And here you got a deal where the FBI has been caught red-handed spying on the Trump campaign, trying to dangle entrapment information in front of them, and, the talking snake media could care less. Why? Just simply does not fit their preferred narrative. All right, we will be right back with more of your phone calls, a little more content. Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Stay with us. We will be right back.
Hey, moms and dads, are you at your wits' end? Hi, this is Mark Gregston with Parenting Today's Teens. I'm so grateful for the partnership we have with American Family Radio. We share a common goal to bring hope to hurting families through the life-changing medium of radio. Be sure to listen Saturday afternoons at 4:30 Central on American Family Radio. Find help and hope for your family with Parenting Today's Teens.
Exposing Washington reveals the deception that plagues our nation's capital.
The mainstream media refuses to tell the truth of what's really happening.
Exposing Washington brings clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C.
The American people must stay informed on what our government is doing.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman brings you the inside scoop of what's happening in our nation's capital.
We must take our country back.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt and I couldn't pay my bills. I was feeling so bad. I got to a point where I needed some help. So I reached out and contacted Trinity.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813 to talk to a certified counselor.
They were able to take all of my different payments and put them all together.
Trinity will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, reduce your interest, and possibly improve your credit score. You'll save thousands.
And they were actually able to work with my creditors. I've been able to pay off close to $15,000 in the last 18 months.
If your debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Stephanie, and I'm debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. Let me play one soundbite before we go to the phones. I love this soundbite. This is Jake Tapper. Now, remember, I've said this about Jake Tapper. Occasionally, this guy will actually veer into decent journalism. I think Jake Tapper has some good instincts, but he just is in this bubble where he never listens to anybody or talks to anybody that has a different view of what's going on. So he's blinded by his own environment, but occasionally he's able to do actually decent journalism. Here he's got Keith Ellison on his show, and Keith Ellison, remember, was a follower for a time of Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan, and was in a private meeting with him not too long ago in a Washington, D.C. hotel, and he wants to become the next Attorney General of Minnesota. It's embarrassing to be associated with Farrakhan. This guy is an outrageous anti-Semitic, blames Jews for everything in the world, blames whites, doesn't believe whites have a right to live, and Ellison's hanging out with this guy and wants to be the next Attorney General. Doesn't work. So Jake Tapper brings up Farrakhan with Keith Ellison, and here's how their conversation went.
Jake, no, I wasn't. Jake, I'm sorry. That's not true, Jake. But I just want to say to you, if anyone who raises concerns about bigotry then is put in a position to have to defend themselves, then we never get to talk about bigotry. And I hope that's not what your purpose is, Jake, because you've stood for an equal society. But if you're going to try to put me on the spot and have to explain myself, I didn't pass a Muslim ban. I didn't, right?
No,
Jake?
you didn't.
This is not my piece of my.
You didn't let me
my
answer.
executive order.
You didn't let me ask my question. My question was: the Washington Post fact checker in March gave you 4 Pinocchios for your claim that you have no relationship with him, and I want you to take a listen to Farrakhan talking in an interview.
That's wrong.
About how you only.
That's not true.
And Farrakhan, the Washington Post fact checker, did give you 4 Pinocchios
Jake,
about that. That's just true.
Jake, they were wrong. Jake,
they were
Jake,
wrong.
I have not. It's untrue, Jake. I'm sorry, and you know, I'm disappointed that that's why you called me on your show today.
I didn't.
You know, because
that's not why I called you on the show.
Court,
but yes,
Jake, the Supreme Court has ruled that the president's ban on Muslims and Muslim countries, and which started in his campaign rhetoric, that is okay. And now, Jake, you want me to have to justify myself based on facts that were not true and were always political. And so that's a shame, Jake, because we can't have a real conversation.
It is a real conversation.
We can't have a conversation about bigotry because you're going to say, well, what about you? Did you ever in any way and anyone know or see anybody who was ever bigoted, and therefore you have no moral standing to claim to decry bigotry? Jake, that's just not true.
I'm not saying that at all.
And I'm sorry we're having this conversation.
You bet he is sorry to be having that conversation. All right, Keith Ellison trying to wiggle out of his connection to Farrakhan, as it's evident from that situation not going to be that easy for him to do. All right, let's grab some phone calls. Let's begin with Susan in Red Stick, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Welcome, Susan. What's on your mind?
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. I just have a comment. As a Baptist, Protestant, evangelical, my concern is a Supreme Court with all Roman Catholics and 2 Jewish. That's not representative. And there was a guy that was nominated for a federal judgeship in Texas, Mathis or Mathis. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
But anyway, he was nominated by Trump, but his nomination was withdrawn. And he's been one of the only people that I've been able to find who has spoken out about the fact that it's becoming a very unrepresentative judiciary. Federal judges are, for the most part, that are being appointed are Roman Catholics, and that to me is a problem. And while I can agree that pro-life is very important always, at what point does our judiciary and those that are over us in the government who would take over as a president or whatever, when they're all Roman Catholic, that to me is a serious problem. Yeah. And it's something that our founding fathers thought was a problem as well.
Well, I appreciate your call, Susan. And, you know, the reality is there were very few Roman Catholics at the time of the founding. Susan is right about that. About 1.4% of the population at the time of the founding were Roman Catholics, 0.2% were Jewish, 99.4% were Protestants. But I would say, Susan, the real issue is what kind of a Catholic are you dealing with? And the same question would be true for Protestants. What kind of a Protestant are we dealing with? What kind of values do they bring with them into the courtroom? You know, and the best jurists that we've had on the court, I mean, Antonin Scalia was a Roman Catholic. Clarence Thomas was Episcopal. He's now Roman Catholic. I think Sam Alito is Catholic. John Roberts is Catholic. These are the best jurists that we have in terms of issuing rulings that are consistent with the Constitution. And we've had others on the court that were Protestants, and they were just way out in the toolies when it came to jurisprudence. So again, I think I appreciate that you would have concerns as a Baptist about Roman Catholics, but I think the question, Susan, you got to ask, let's look at the Roman Catholic himself and say, what are his values, the values that are going to impact what he would do as a judge? And, of course, if the values don't line up, it doesn't matter whether he's Roman Catholic or whether he's Protestant, we're going to be opposed to him. But if he does, then let's support him. And because we've had very, very good success, good luck with Roman Catholic jurists. All right, Susan, listen, I appreciate the call. Thank you for that. Let's grab a call from Karen in Richmond. Karen, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, thanks. This morning I listened to the Rosenstein hearing, especially Trey Gowdy, when he was going enough already, too much time, too much money. It inspired me to call my congressman, who is Dave Bratt, who is a financial guy, and my message to his office was that I would like to see he and the rest of the members of Congress, and I'd like to know what you think of this because others should call their representatives, give the Mueller investigation a date certain to produce results, or it's going to be, don't defund the FBI, but defund the investigation by a date certain. And after that, if they want to continue the investigation, you can do private funds or however you want to do it. What do you think of that? Do you think that has a possibility?
Well, it's probably unlikely to happen, but, you've got a good point that the Mueller investigation so far has spent close to $20 million when you look at all the money they spent. And they've got absolutely zero. They've got nothing. And I have no problem with your suggestion, Karen, that those that hold the purse strings, which is Congress, they would say to Mueller, look, we've funded you $20 million. We've got nothing to show for all that taxpayer money. We're going to start pressing you to get some results by this, like you say, a date certain, and then the funding's going to run out. We're done with this charade. We've had it with this. It's been a dog and pony show. We're glad it's happened because it's exposed the rank bias in the FBI and the DOJ, and Bob Mueller, you're a part of that, so we don't want to give you any more money than we absolutely have to. We need to get to the end of this charade and fold it up, and I think what you're talking about would be a way to do that. All right, thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Let's grab one more sound bite before we are done for the day. Where's that one, Rob? I told you I wanted to play. 18? Let me get there and find it. Oh, yeah. This is Tom Arnold. Tom Arnold, remember, was out there talking that, hey, Michael Cohen and me, that's Trump's former attorney, we're tight. Michael Cohen's got all these tapes, and I know about them. These are great tapes. Michael Cohen and I, we're going to team up together, and we are going to take Trump down. And so he goes on let's see which program this is on. I don't who he was talking to here. Maybe he goes on I think an MSNBC program, and he gets asked questions about this joint effort between him and Michael Cohen to take Donald Trump down. Now, we've edited the silent spots. We've shrunk them for the sake of our listening audience. They're much longer than they sound even on this tape.
Did Michael Cohen tell you specifically that he is working with the authorities, that he has agreed to cooperate with the authorities in their investigation?
I wouldn't. This is too important to me to F around, and you know the word I'm talking about. And I have a 5-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, and that's really why I'm doing the show. And we're having fun with these Trump tapes. But this is serious to me, Poppy, and I'm not effing around.
I'm asking you.
No, I'm not saying you think I am.
Did Michael Cohen tell you specifically, really just yes or no, that he is cooperating with the authorities should charges be brought?
We need cricket sounds.
Tom Arnold.
Did he tell you?
Paging Tom Arnold.
Do you not want to answer the question?
Tom?
No.
So he did not want to answer the question. I mean, they were painful silences. Well, that is it for today. Thanks for being in the conversation. Here's a blessing for the rest of your day. Now to him who is able to strengthen you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery that was kept secret for long ages, to the only wise God, be glory forevermore through Jesus Christ. Amen. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, to bow low before God. Don't forget to stand tall before man. Stand in the gap where God has placed you, and never forget, with God's help, we are fighting. We've seen evidence after evidence after evidence. We are fighting a winnable war.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Hello, this is Dr. Ronnie Floyd, President of the National Day of Prayer Task Force. The Apostle Paul wrote that we should pray without ceasing. Every day should be a day of prayer. As you pray today, would you please remember to pray for our nation and our leaders? We know God hears our prayers, and we